love making stained glass mosaics, but you want to take a break from grouting? Then I've got a project for you. In today's video, we'll create 3 ungrouted stained glass mosaic projects, and then we'll compare them to an ungrouted Pique Assiette mosaic. Which do you like better? We'll talk about it. Let's get to it. Welcome back, and if you're new here, my name is Julie, and on this channel we talk about tips, tricks, tools, adhesives, materials, and specific mosaic projects, all to shorten your learning curve when it comes to creating mosaic art. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, please consider subscribing. I know there's a segment of mosaic artists who get really excited when there's a mosaic project that doesn't require grouting. Am I right? So today's tutorial is definitely for you. But there's a reason we're talking about this particular topic, and it has something to do with a video I posted here previously on my channel. If you've been here for a while, then you may recall this mosaic I made in a previous video. It's an ungrouted Pique Assiette mosaic. If you aren't familiar, Pique Assiette, which is French and roughly translates to thief of plates, is a style of mosaic that includes broken plates, bowls, mugs, ceramic shards, and found objects into a single design or pattern. So this one here included bits of plates, bowls, and mugs or cups. And in the tutorial, I took you through the entire project from blank substrate to the finished piece. I'll include a link to that video down below in the description in case you'd like to check it out. You can access this information if you're on your desktop computer by clicking Show More under the video description. And if you're watching on your tablet or smartphone, you can click the down arrow to the right of the video title. Once that video came out, I started getting questions from stained glass artists and mosaic artists asking if this ungrouted technique could be used with stained glass instead of using the broken plates, bowls, mugs, etc. And of course it can. It definitely takes on a different look though, which we'll discuss later in the video. It's one thing for me to tell you it can be done, but it's another thing for you to actually see it and be able to compare the Pique Assiette version to the ungrouted stained glass version. So to give us some artwork to compare to the Pique Assiette version, I thought it would be fun in this video to create the stained glass ungrouted pieces and then compare them. And these mosaics, incidentally, make great gifts if you're looking to make a mosaic for, let's say, the holidays, special event, or a birthday, and you're short on time. So in today's video, I'll share how I created 3 small ungrouted stained glass mosaics from start to finish, and we'll also compare them to the Pique Assiette ungrouted mosaic. We've got a lot to cover, so let's get started. The substrate for all 3 mosaics is a 3-inch square artist canvas board. I had a really tough time finding these in this small size. This is the same substrate type that I used in the Pique Assiette mosaic we talked about a little earlier. And these substrates aren't to be confused with the artist stretch canvas. Those are the ones that have a wood frame with the canvas wrapped around it and stapled. The substrates we're using are canvas, which are adhered directly to a board, most likely chipboard, and then wrapped around the back. The surface has a white linen-like texture to it. If you want to paint the canvas, you certainly can, or you could even cover it with scrapbook paper or cardstock. I chose to keep the substrates white with each of the mosaics I'll be sharing today. For the tools, I'll be using wheeled glass nippers, a glass cutter, running pliers, and long arm tweezers. I'll also be using toothpicks, which I guess we can include as a tool here on the list. I have videos here on my channel which demonstrate how to use all of these if you're interested, except maybe the toothpicks. For the adhesive, I'm using Weld Bond. It's a white glue that dries clear and has a superior hold, especially on a project like this. As for the TESSERAE, I use stained glass almost exclusively, except for a couple embellishments. Stained glass scraps work really well with these small mosaics, but you can certainly cut down your larger sheets of stained glass as well. So once I'm done tiling the projects, we can then compare the ungrouted stained glass to the ungrouted Pique Assiette. You'll see in these stained glass pieces I'm making that I'm keeping the design very basic and allowing the grout line to really play a bigger role in the finished piece. Just as a reminder, we aren't going to be grouting these finished pieces, but I still want to maintain a grout line in between the tesserae. So the grout line is that open area that surrounds all of the tesserae. I'll include a list down below in the description for all of the materials, tools, substrates that I'm using in today's video in case you'd like to make some ungrouted stained glass mosaics of your own. For the first mosaic, I'm going to make a pumpkin, although you'll see it kind of ends up looking like an orange, but I don't care. I like those too. They're both cute. I don't care. So I started by drawing a very light pencil outline on the substrate. My goal is for the glass design to lay just outside of the pencil lines. If you need to erase your pencil marks, I would recommend using an eraser like this as opposed to a red eraser that's on traditional pencils. Next, I got to work with selecting stained glass in orange for the body of the pumpkin, brown for the stem, and dark green for a leaf. For projects like this, I like to see how I can maybe use a piece of stained glass for the design, making minimal cuts to it. So once I was happy with how the pieces looked, I started adhering them to the substrate. Remember, the whole idea of this ungrouted mosaic is to tile the design and leave grout lines that will never be filled with grout. As I mentioned earlier, I'm using Weld Bond as the adhesive. I want the tesserae to be flush on the substrate surface. Other adhesive options include Thin Set, which is a cement-based adhesive, Epoxy Sculpt, tile adhesive, and silicone. Now, just be aware that some of those adhesives will raise your tesserae up off the surface of the substrate a little or a lot, depending on how much adhesive you use. Once I was done tiling, I went around the perimeter of the design with a toothpick to clean up any adhesive that may have oozed out. And then I put the mosaic to the side to fully dry. Next up is a Christmas tree. Are you sensing a theme here? I started by pulling together my tesserae, starting with this silver star and small round glass pieces. I also pulled together mixed shades of green stained glass and brown stained glass for the trunk. And then I lightly drew a Christmas tree outline on the substrate. Now, as you can see, I'm keeping the substrate white and not painting it or doing anything to it. Just as I did with the pumpkin mosaic, I started looking through the green stained glass to see if there were any pieces which wouldn't need cutting or maybe minimal cutting in order to fit within the pencil lines. and I got to work fitting the tesserae into place. Sometimes I would measure and draw cut lines on the tesserae with a Sharpie marker. Once I got enough tesserae in place and fitting nicely with enough grout line around them, I started adhering the tesserae to the substrate with weld bond. Before I attached the tree trunk, I went around the edge of the design to clean up any adhesive with a toothpick that may have oozed out. Now, as you can see, I have Sharpie marker lines on my tesserae, which we'll address a little later in the video. But for now, I put the mosaic to the side and let it dry thoroughly. The last mosaic is a heart. And I went old school with making a pattern for this one. So I folded a Post-it note in half, which is the same size as the substrate, and started cutting. I wanted a little bit of white space above and below the heart, so I made a few more snips to the pattern and was then ready to go. I eyeballed the placement of the heart. You can certainly measure it out if you want. And then I used double-sided tape to keep the pattern in place while I lightly traced around it. And then I got to work going through my scrap glass to see what pieces I could use which wouldn't need cutting. I cut tesserae and put them in place on the substrate, making sure my tesserae was outside the lines of the heart. Once I had a good amount of tesserae cut and in place, I got to work with adhering them to the substrate with weld bond. I made sure there was enough of a grout line between the tesserae. I didn't get a ruler out to measure, and that goes for any of the pieces. I just eyeballed it. Once I was done tiling the heart, I decided to cut some more stained glass to create a border. So I took strips of pink stained glass and cut them down into squares and then cut them down further into a bunch of small circles. They're not perfect. And then I ran them over the glass grinder and cleaned off the edges. Ta-da! Here they are! Next, I cut each circle in half with my wheeled glass nippers. I took each half circle and adhered them to the border of the heart. And I went all the way around the outside of the heart. I tried to keep that grout line consistent with the rest of the heart mosaic. I like how it looks handmade and not machine made, and it reminds me of lace. I remember lace doilies. You know, kids would glue their Valentine onto a lace doily, paper lace doily. And so this reminds me of that. Once I was happy with how the mosaic looked, I put it to the side to fully dry. And now it's been at least 24 hours, more like 48, and these mosaics are fully dry. Now, if you're looking at these artist canvases and you're thinking, but what about the Sharpie marker on the glass, or that maybe you can see some of my pencil lines? Well, we're going to take care of both of those items really easily. First, let's work on the Sharpie marker. And for that, I'm using a little rubbing alcohol on a cotton swab. Because I used weld bond, the tesserae are really stuck down. So I could wipe the glass rigorously, but instead, I'm going to be patient and take my time. I don't want to get the cotton swab soaking wet because I don't want the moisture to leak down onto the substrate. I just want to keep the rubbing alcohol on the top of the glass. And once all of the marker is off, let's move on to the pencil marks. Since I'm not able to get a little eraser in between all of those little tesserae, I'll just take a toothpick and some craft acrylic paint in white and I'll lightly touch up the lines. For this reason, it's good to stay with the original white color of the artist canvas board. But again, you don't have to. You can certainly find a craft acrylic paint to match the background of your mosaic, whether you painted it or whether you're using some sort of scrapbook paper or cardstock. I'm purposely not using a paintbrush so that I can have the minimal amount of paint on the canvas in a very controlled way. I'm working with a very light hand. Now let's talk about this idea of ungrouted mosaics. First of all, how do you feel about not grouting stained glass mosaics? Do you like the look? Do you feel like something's missing? Is this something you're going to start doing in your mosaic art practice? I'll be honest, I'm not sure I'm digging the ungrouted stained glass mosaic. And now that the ungrouted stained glass mosaics have been made and cleaned up, I thought it would be fun to compare them to the Pique Assiette mosaic I made in a previous video. Now, I am a fan of the ungrouted Pique Assiette, but I have my reservations, like I said, about the ungrouted stained glass version. I don't know, maybe if the stained glass was tiled without grout lines, meaning the TESSERAE were all pushed up next to each other, or if the mosaic had really small grout lines, maybe I would like it better. But there's definitely a lot of character in the Pique Assiette piece because all of those designs on the TESSERAE really add to the overall feel of the mosaic. Whereas with the ungrouted stained glass mosaics, you really have to bring the personality in with your design, or you could use glass that has a lot of personality or some unique characteristics, whether that's in pattern or texture. I'll include a list down below in the description for all of the substrates, materials, tools, adhesives that I used in this video in case you'd like to make some ungrouted stained glass mosaics of your own. What do we think? Are we in focus? Me. Just warming up. I hope you guys are doing well. I know you've been asking for a tutorial, and baby, tutorials are back. Yeah! For the first pumpkin, I'm gonna make a pumpkin. Duh! This was my first tutorial since I entered my hand this year, and it felt great using the tools. Absolutely great. I feel really good. Really good. So, positive steps forward. For more mosaic inspiration, check out one of these two videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye!